Balance of Power, live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm David Gura in for Joe Matthew. Tonight, President Trump takes a victory lap with Japan's new prime minister.
This woman is a winner. So, we've become very close friends all of a sudden because their stock market today and our stock market today hit an all-time high. That means we're doing something right.
The president's comments to members of the U.S. military as the Trump-Xi trade talks near the potential for him to avert a trade crisis his administration triggered back in March. For more on what a final deal could look like and details on that sit-down, which is scheduled to take place on Thursday on the sidelines of the APEC summit, we'll go to Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall, who is traveling with the president in Japan. And I'll speak with Max Baucus, the former U.S. ambassador to China. Plus, Nvidia's AI Super Bowl is taking place in Washington. The chipmaker's CEO outlines the company's plans for growth and sits down with my colleague Ed Ludlow, the co-anchor of Bloomberg Tech.
We are manufacturing in America again. It is incredible. The first thing that President Trump asked me for is bring manufacturing back.
Jensen Huang taking the stage during the three-day conference after Nvidia announced a $1 billion investment in Nokia. Ed is going to join me on set to share what he learned from Huang and Nokia's chief executive about their plans to work together. Also tonight, the big news lifting tech stocks to all-time highs. Microsoft announcing a new stake in OpenAI during a big week for tech earnings on a day when Apple's market cap hit $4 trillion. Robin Bostic is going to have more in tonight's Power Move segment. And details on the biggest single attack on alleged drug traffickers so far after U.S. forces hit what Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth calls narco-terrorist boats. More on that up ahead. But we begin tonight with President Trump's trip to Asia with new developments as we come on the air. The Wall Street Journal reporting the president and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping will discuss lowering tariffs if China cracks down on fentanyl. The Journal reporting, quote, China is expected to commit to more controls on the export of so-called precursor chemicals used to make fentanyl, a synthetic opioid blamed for hundreds of thousands of drug overdose deaths in recent years. In return, the U.S. could cut its 20% fentanyl-related tariff on Chinese goods by as much as 10%. Just one in a series of developments from the region tonight as Trump prepares for highly anticipated meetings with Xi. For the latest, we turn to Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall, who's in Tokyo.
It was a warm reception here in Tokyo for President Trump as he himself piled on the praise for the new Japanese prime minister, who's only had a matter of days in office to prepare for this visit. The main theme was bolstering the U.S.-Japan alliance, but the underlying theme was countering China. Just look at the headlines that we got out of the meetings today. 1, President Trump confirming that Japan will boost its imports of U.S. military supplies. 2, the country signed an agreement for cooperation on critical minerals. 3, there was also a memorandum of understanding when it comes to shipbuilding, as China has a grip on the global market in both of those sectors. Then we turn to the investments, as President Trump held a reception with business leaders here in Tokyo. All of the executives in attendance represented industries that the U.S. has deemed critical for competition with China. Everything from energy to AI to car manufacturing. It is clear that the U.S. is trying to gain as much leverage as possible heading into Thursday's meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping. President Trump will soon travel to South Korea, where he is expected to have a few meetings before that highly anticipated one. David, he's set to meet face-to-face with South Korea's president as that country is trying to secure its own tariff deal. And then the president said that he is also expected to meet with Nvidia's Jensen Huang, who's going to be in the area because of the APEC CEO summit happening side by side.
Tyler, thank you very much. That's Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall in Tokyo with that report. For more insight into that meeting on Thursdays, Max Baucus joins me here on set in Washington. Was, of course, a Democratic senator and then the U.S. ambassador to China from 2014 to 2017. Great to see you. Thank you for being here. I think of all the principals that you met who were involved in these negotiations, the preliminary level, you've met President Xi Jinping as well during that 3-year tenure that you had in Beijing. What are your expectations going into this meeting on Thursday?
I think bottom line, this is going to be a kind of hand-holding, kind of a truce, kind of lowering of the temperature, and not a lot of substantive solid agreements. I think a lot of this is paving the way toward, hopefully, a summit later on next year with President Xi in China. They'll talk about, clearly, soybeans. Fentanyl is clearly on the table. Tariffs will be on the table. That's more of the easier stuff. A little later on, they'll get to export controls and rare earths. That's going to be a little more difficult. And after that, more difficult yet is going to be Ukraine, and potentially Xi Jinping is going to try to get a commitment from President Trump to say he does not support independence of Taiwan. That's going to be hard to get, but he's going to want that. The one point here too is that there are a lot of subjects. This is not a long meeting.
No.
So I think it's going to be an attempt to kind of lower the temperature. I think it's going to work a bit. The real question is what's next. People are kind of getting used to the so-called taco effect.
Trump always chickens out as it goes. Yeah.
Wondering about that a little bit. In addition, the last agreements didn't work out too well a couple of years ago. And add to that, the different personalities here. President Trump is very transactional, and he's going to try to charm President Xi, magnetically trying to charm him and so on and so forth. But President Xi is kind of a cool cookie. He's been around the track a couple, 3 times, and he's pretty difficult to charm. But I think, bottom line, things will cool off a little bit. And we hopefully they're going to work toward an agreement in China. We have to remember, though, that when presidents meet like this, and when they have feel-good meetings, when they go home, things sometimes get a little different. Then they kind of face reality. President Biden has had Biden a couple of times. It tends to happen because the hawks start to take over. They don't take over, but they exercise their influence on the presidents later on.
We had this agreement from Malaysia. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Jamieson Greer, the U.S. Trade Representative, announced this framework deal, sort of setting the table for this meeting. Are you satisfied that enough preliminary work has been done here to set the table for this meeting that's going to take place on Thursday? I think what we've heard over and over again is, especially when the Chinese have a leaders meeting like this, they like a lot to be figured out in advance. Has the president's team set him up for success so much as they have? Well,
I'd like to see the table set a little more, frankly. Secretary Bessent has not spent a lot of time in Malaysia with Hu Lifeng, his counterpart. I would like to see this set up a little bit more. But on the other hand, we're dealing with President Trump. A set table is a little less relevant to him. What's more relevant to him is what his mood is today, what he wants to do, what he thinks gets him the most leverage. I'm a little concerned about something else, though, and that's Southeast Asian countries are going to be a little concerned, slightly worried. Is President Trump going to try to do a transactional deal with President Xi? It kind of helps the United States, it helps China, but it kind of cuts out Southeast Asia a little bit. And I think that's a real concern. And that's in part because the United States is slowly semi-exiting from the world stage as being the leader of the moral leader and values of get agreements and so forth. And that's going to leave a little bit of a vacuum worldwide. And Southeast Asia is a little concerned about that.
We had Nick Burns, another former U.S. ambassador to China, on last night. Maybe we can get Gary Locke on later in the week and do this every night. But something he brought up was that he talked a lot about fentanyl when he was in that office. I know that you did as well. Why has it been something that stymied so many diplomats like you trying to get China to do more to curb the export of these chemicals?
Yeah, I talked to fentanyl till I'm blue in the face with the Chinese. And I tell them over and over again, hey, this is a no-brainer. Curb significantly the precursors of fentanyl because that'll make a big difference to the United States. They'll see your good faith. Well, when I mentioned that to the Chinese, one reaction I get is, well, will we get credit for it? But beyond that, this is quite complicated because a lot of American biological companies get their precursors from China. It's legit. It's not illegit. It's not for fentanyl. It's for a lot of other drugs. And it's a little bit difficult to separate the wheat from the chaff, frankly. And add to that, there's a lot of skullduggery going on in China. Within China, there's a lot of business deals put together by different biotechs. And most of it's legit, but some of it's not.
You know, I heard the president a few weeks ago outlining the sanctions, the tariffs that he's put in place, and it's actually hard to keep track of all of the various sanctions that are tariffs that are in place there. I'm curious to sort of how you've watched China react to this. So, absent this meeting, absent a deal, yes, we've had these meetings that have taken place in Europe with the Treasury Secretary. What have you been watching China do as a result, as all of this unfolds?
Yeah, I've seen China stand up to the United States. Much more than have other countries, more than has Europe. or say Mexico and to some degree Canada, because those are smaller countries. I think some of this began with the Alaskan summit a few years ago between our secretary and a guy named Yang Ditcher, who was their top guy. Things kind of went south there. But at that meeting, it was clear to me that China was starting to realize, hey, we can stand up to America. We can go toe-to-toe with this country. And when Trump imposed all these tariffs on China at 145%, China retaliated with 125%. But the main thing is China stood up. China just didn't buckle. China is, and they've got rare earth now, which makes it easier for them not to buckle. So the big difference is that we're two different countries now. They've got their different regime. They're authoritarian, not democracy, no rule of law to speak of, and so forth. We're a democracy. We hopefully have good following rule of law, independent judiciary. But we have to get along. We're two separate countries. We have to get along, and I think both countries are realizing that. But to your point, I think China is starting to realize that more and more. And I hope that, frankly, in South Korea and hopefully later in Beijing, that our two countries start to realize, hey, we got to get along better together because that's better for everybody.
Last question is just about the sanctity of Taiwanese independence, and we've heard varying statements from the president about that. And I wonder how worried you are that in the course of this meeting or subsequent meetings, that commitment to Taiwanese independence isn't going to be as ironclad as it was certainly when President Obama was in office, President Biden. Are you worried about that being kind of a bargaining chip in these talks?
I am worried, but I'm not worried. When President Trump first took office, he said, what's this one China policy? He basically started to sell Taiwan down the river. And somebody went back to him and said, wait, hey, American policy is one China. It's China. I think that on the one hand, Trump is more transactional. He's going to do a deal with President Xi if he can. But on the other hand, people in Taiwan and they like it the way it is. They like the status quo. And add to that, I don't think President Xi is going to do anything irrational. He's not. His bottom line is protecting his own political survival. And he's not going to do something stupid that might cause some problems back home if things in Taiwan don't go right. Don't forget, he saw what happened with Putin in Ukraine. And in the PLA, the Chinese army is not very well tested. So I'm not as worried about Taiwan as others are. And in fact, I'm not worried at all about Taiwan. But I do hope that we maintain our current strategy, which is strategic ambiguity, keep things as it is. Don't forget, Deng Xiaoping, the former so-called leader, he said when they're negotiating with Nixon and Kissinger about Taiwan, Deng Xiaoping said, let's just put Taiwan on the shelf. We'll deal with that later. It should always stay on the shelf. We keep doing that later. Let's kick that can down the road.
One quick question at the end here. I haven't met a legislator who misses a lot of the kind of day in and day out work on Capitol Hill. As you've watched this shutdown unfold, what is your thinking about how unique this shutdown is and how it seems like there is no exit ramp here for either party, at least readily apparent?
It's disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting. Both sides are too proud. They just don't talk to each other. Neither side wants to give in. Each side thinks it has the upper hand. And I just think when push comes to shove, that's when the military start not getting paychecks, when food stamps aren't being delivered, when hospital payments aren't being made, then I think after a while things are going to get really hot. It's going to force them to come together.
Ambassador, nice to see you. Thank you very much for making the time. That's Ambassador Max Baucus, of course, former senator as well, joining me here on set in New York, as D.C. rather. He was, of course, the ambassador to China from 2014 to 2017. We saw a rally today in the world's largest technology companies. It sent stocks to all-time highs amid speculation that artificial intelligence will keep driving earnings higher. The S&P 500 topped 6,900 and the NASDAQ 100 rose 1% as investors looked for assurances that billions of dollars for computing infrastructure will continue and ultimately pay off down the road. We have more details now in Power Moves with my colleague Romaine Bostick, who joins us from Bloomberg's world headquarters in New York City. We are here in the busiest week for earnings. Obviously, a lot of scrutiny, Romaine, on these big mega cap tech companies.
Yeah.
What have you been watching over the course of the day?
Yeah, and all eyes today on Wall Street was actually in Washington, just a few blocks from where you're sitting today, David, with that big keynote address by Jensen Huang. You talk about the AI trade, just to put that into perspective of why the market is so gaga over it. You talk about what is now approaching $500 billion in excess capital expenditures in the AI and broader tech space. That compares to just about $1 trillion last year. So we're now at $1.5 trillion here in 2025. Add to that about 1.3 percentage points of the 1.6 percentage points of GDP growth we had in the first half directly related to spending on computers and other information services. That's why you saw the NASDAQ hit a record high today. Microsoft also hit a record high today, largely on the back of it actually now creating a little bit more space between itself and OpenAI, the company reaching an agreement that would basically give it a 27% stake in the company as OpenAI transforms from a nonprofit to a for-profit company and potentially a publicly traded company. You also saw a strong bid come into some of the other big players in this space, David, including Amazon and Meta. We should point out that Meta, Amazon, and Microsoft all report earnings tomorrow, so we will get a chance to see what their CapEx spend is. And we'll also hear from Apple, but a day after that on Thursday. But we should point out, Apple, while it has been a bit of a laggard as of late, it did close today at a record high and briefly traded above a $4 trillion market cap, only the third company in history to ever do that.
$4 trillion. Romain, let me ask you, it's a big day for prediction markets as well. You had Polymarket announcing plans to get back into the U.S., and you had the Trump Media Corporation indicating it plans to get into the game as well. What do we see in that corner of the market today?
Yeah, Polymarket, which was effectively kicked out of the U.S. in 2022 because of some violations that the CFTC said it had made, now basically back in a big way and says that it's going to come back with a sports product as soon as next month. You saw a big rally in some of the shares of the publicly traded companies in this space, like Truth Social, like Trump Media, I should say. But at the same time, you saw a big downdraft in some of the more traditional casino operators. DraftKings having one of its worst days in quite some time. And just to put a finer point on it, DraftKings had actually started the year with like a 40% rally. It's been down about 40% since hitting its peak earlier this year. Flutter Entertainment, which owns FanDuel, similar trajectory for that stock through the first 8 months of the year. It had rallied about 20%. It's lost about 20% since, largely because of this idea. It's not just Polymarket, though. It's the Truth Socials. It's Kalshi. It's maybe even potentially Robinhood and Coinbase, all now getting into a prediction market that also will have a focus on sports, David.
Power Moves with Romain Bostick. Romain, thank you very much. I appreciate that update. Coming up, the government shutdown now in its 5th week with no end in sight. We're going to discuss the path forward with Senator Mike Rounds, Republican of South Dakota. That's up ahead. But first, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has ordered forceful strikes against Hamas in response to attacks on Israeli soldiers in Gaza, potentially jeopardizing the fragile ceasefire that's been in place there. Jen Gavito of the Cohen Group is going to join me next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Bloomberg Radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio. I'm David Gura. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ordered forceful strikes against Hamas in response to attacks on Israeli soldiers in Gaza, throwing into doubt the U.S. brokered ceasefire. The order to strike came after security consultations and statements from Defense Minister Israel Katz that Hamas will pay a heavy price for attacking Israeli soldiers and violating a promise to return the bodies of dead hostages. For more on the Hamas attack and Israel's decision to step up strikes and jeopardize that ceasefire, joined by Jen Gavito, senior advisor with the Cohen Group, also the former acting principal deputy assistant secretary of state for Near Eastern affairs under President Biden. Thank you very much for being here. It was just a few days ago that we saw the vice president in the region trying to fortify, keep in place this very fragile ceasefire. How does this announcement from the prime minister stand to jeopardize that? How are you thinking about sort of what this means and what's likely to come next?
Sure. I mean, I think the first thing to consider is that this ceasefire has been very fragile from the very beginning. Both of the parties, it took so long to get to a ceasefire because both parties really had a vested interest in extending the conflict. And so it is against that backdrop and a lot of stubborn diplomacy by the Trump administration that you reached the point that you did. But I think this reinforces that the mediators to this, not just the United States, but on the Hamas side, certainly need pressure from Qatar, Egypt, Turkey, and others in order to keep this in place. It is very fragile indeed, and certainly the outbreak in violence is just the latest in the ceasefire violations.
Earlier today, I spoke with Matt Whitaker, the ambassador, U.S. ambassador to NATO, and I asked him about what we saw here, this news, and here's what he had to say.
We got, all the living hostages were returned home, and that was obviously a very important moment in this dispute and this war. But we'll just have to watch it. I think, the people of Gaza want peace. It's only Hamas that is the problem. And so, Israel has certainly a right to defend itself, and we'll just have to see what additional pressure and additional opportunities the world can bring to make sure that Hamas is not hostile and doesn't continue to wreak havoc in the Gaza Strip.
On the pressures and opportunities, it strikes me that when this deal was announced, this is what was inchoate, sort of how the world was going to deal with Hamas as Israel moved out of Gaza. Your sense of what pressure can be applied here and how difficult it's going to be to see a more peaceful Gaza as you have elements of Hamas still existing within that territory?
So at the beginning, this was ultimately a ceasefire agreement. The president has called this a peace agreement, but the reality is phase one was in fact a ceasefire. And if that's going to hold, then I think the parties have to move very quickly to phase two, and that includes fulfilling obligations on both sides. And so certainly Ambassador Whitaker is correct that Hamas is a problem here. But I think the Palestinians would also say that there have been violations, and certainly the violence that we saw today went both directions. So I do think that in order for this to hold, you're going to have to really move forward with the overall peace agreement, and that is being able to start a reconstruction effort in Gaza, allow people to return to homes. Something like 93% of Gazans are unhoused or underhoused. The aid is, continues to be relatively slow getting in, and so in both directions, I think there's got to be real progress towards improving lives for the Gazans themselves, but also then in conjunction with that moving towards real disarmament of Hamas. And that is going to take, you noted the effort by Vice President Vance. Marco Rubio was there. The U.S. is really leaning on the Israelis, and Qatar, Turkey, Egypt, and other Arab partners really need to apply that same pressure to Hamas.
We have about a minute left. I'm just curious of what you'll be watching for, so to kind of assess the likelihood that the ceasefire holds. What are you watching for? What's going to indicate its viability going forward?
Well, I'm watching Prime Minister Netanyahu's coalition. The ceasefire was not necessarily something that they wanted. They would like to continue operations against Hamas. And so what I'm really watching for is what the pressure continues to be from the United States administration, really holding the Israeli feet to the fire, and then likewise on Hamas. And can you things like the attacks on the IDF at the Rafah, in Rafah City, that has to stop. And so the Arab partners really need to apply all of that pressure in order for this to hold.
You're optimistic that's going to happen?
I am optimistic that this administration is fully committed to the ceasefire and will do what needs to be done for it to move forward. So I must say I'm a bit more optimistic than I would have been just a few weeks ago.
And I'm very curious, do you think celebrations were premature about what this means for the Middle East more broadly, this ceasefire? You talked about it kind of in discrete terms. Yeah, you do.
I do. I think it's quite premature. This is a decades-long conflict. There's a long way to go. I do think that, if you put this agreement in the context of broader normalization potential between Arab states and Israel, everybody has incentive to make this work long term. But there is an awful lot of work to be done, not least of which, the very, very basic humanitarian requirements as a starting point, and then reducing the violence in the West Bank as well. So there's a long way to go.
Yeah. Jen, great to see you. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming in as well. That's Jen Gavito, who joined me here, senior advisor with the Cohen Group. And coming up, we're going to go to Capitol Hill to hear from a Republican senator who heard from the Vice President of the United States today. That's Senator Mike Rounds of South Dakota. He's going to join us. I should say he's on the Senate Armed Services Committee. And a bit of news today. We heard from the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, who is with President Trump in Asia on that three-destination trip, that there have been more attacks on boats off the coast of South America. Going to get his perspective on what we know about those attacks, what lawmakers know and what they don't know, and the pressure that we see mounting on Capitol Hill for answers from the administration. Again, Senator Mike Rounds of South Dakota joining us next here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Bloomberg Radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm David Gura, in for Joe Matthew. Nvidia announced its plans to make a $1 billion equity investment in Nokia as the AI sector's kingmaker bets on the Finnish company's pivot from mobile networking into artificial intelligence. The news today sent Nokia shares soaring, the most in more than a decade. Following the news, Ed Ludlow, host of Bloomberg Tech, sat down with Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang and Nokia CEO Justin Hotard. Ed joins me now with more details of their conversation here in the Washington Bureau. Big day, this announcement, of course, but happening in the crucible of Nvidia having this major conference here in Washington, D.C.
Yeah,
with
and that
developers.
Nokia news was probably the biggest surprise. And a lot of people quite rightly were going, why is Nvidia, the world's leading AI chip company and AI name, interested in mobile networks? And, you know, for Jensen Huang, this is very much about national security. The biggest player in that market is Huawei, particularly in Europe, the Middle East and Africa. Nokia is number 3, but it's a company that wants to become American. You know, it was one example, you know, but overall, Jensen Huang's kind of message was, we're alive and kicking. All the things that I said will happen are going to happen. So, you know, let's listen to some of the interview, but this is a bullish Jensen Huang.
For national security reasons, for economic reasons, our industry should be built on American technology, and for the very first time, we can do that. We have a brand new product line that takes advantage of computing, accelerated computing, and AI, and we have a great partner to help us do it with, Nokia.
The market reaction kind of speaks for itself. There was a time when Nokia was already looking to America. You've been in the role since April, but may I start by asking you what role the administration played in bringing you both together, if this is indeed a strategic priority?
Well, I don't think there was anything specific that the administration did, other than they've created the environment to support innovation. I mean, Jensen's talked about manufacturing, but it's also about R&D and innovation and technology leadership. And if you think about where this world is going and all those incredible devices that are going to be built on Nvidia platforms, robotics, autonomous vehicles, you know, augmented reality, virtual reality, we need a different kind of network in the future. And that's what we realized. And that's why we wanted to forge this partnership, so that we're building a network leveraging AI for AI services. And that's really the big change here.
And the technology is flowing both ways. I mean, what is it that you will be able to do with Nokia, Jensen, that you weren't able to do on your own?
Well, first of all, Nokia is in all of the world's base stations. And this air-scale platform of Nokia is in millions of base stations around the world. If our computers are not inside that base station, it doesn't help. It's no different than NVIDIA's tech computing platforms not inside a car, it doesn't help. And so the first thing is we need a partner to get us into the world's space stations. We also, remember, we're bringing AI to radio networks, AI to RAN, so that we can make wireless tech communications a lot more efficient. Second, we're bringing AI for the radio, meaning on top of these radio networks and these telecommunication network, we're going to be able to provide AI services, which is going to be able to make it easier for us to do robotics and autonomous vehicles and industrial automation and reach all of the different places around the world. That's kind of hard to do with Wi-Fi. Cellular reaches everything. And so we now have this fabric that we can deploy AI computing services on top of it. It's going to be completely revolutionary.
In your world and in your market, Huawei is an influential player, not just in Europe, I think also about the Middle East and Africa. How important is the relationship with Nvidia to be able to counter, you know, what Huawei does in those markets?
Yeah, look, I think for us, one of the principles I've had with my team since coming in has been do what we can do that no one else can do, and that is AirScale, what we do with AnyRAN software, the software that runs on it that we're going to be putting on the Nvidia Arc platform. That do what we can do well and partner with the best everywhere else. And this is a clear opportunity to partner with the best. And by the way, that's where America and the Western world succeeds, because we don't necessarily have one company doing everything like Huawei. We succeed because we partner aggressively. And if you watch GTT today, it was hard to not find it obvious that you're partnering with everybody. But that's the advantage, is this partnership. So we do what we do best. We let NVIDIA do what they do best, and ultimately our customers win, and ultimately for America, I think America will win because there'll be more innovation faster here.
Nobody knows telecommunications better than Nokia. They've been at it for a long time. They're all over the world. And between our two partnerships, we now have wireless telecommunications, we have AI, and we have accelerated computing, all in this partnership.
Just some of my colleague Ed Ludlow's interview there with Jensen Huang and the CEO of Nokia. You can find the whole thing on the terminal, of course, or at Bloomberg. My thanks to Ed Ludlow for joining me here in Washington, D.C. today. You can catch Ed every morning alongside Caroline Hyde on Bloomberg Tech at 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific on Bloomberg Television. Well, key food assistance benefits are set to halt in just days, impacting more than 40 million Americans after the Trump administration said it lacks the authority to keep the program funded during a shutdown. In addition to this impact on SNAP benefits, other services that are set to be delayed or altogether stopped include pay for the military and federal workers, including air traffic controllers. Joining me now with his perspective, live from Capitol Hill, is Republican Senator Mike Rounds of South Dakota. He's a member of the Senate Appropriations, Banking, and Armed Services Committee. Hope we can hit on all of those remits if we can. Senator, thank you for being here. And I know that you had lunch today with the Vice President of the United States. He came up and met with you and your Republican colleagues. What did you hear from him just about the path forward here at a time when it seems like there is no easy exit ramp from this government shutdown?
Actually, there is a very easy exit on this, and that is for our Democrat colleagues to do what they did 13 times during Joe Biden's administration, and they've refused to do 13 times for President Trump's administration, and that is pass a clean continuing resolution, or CR. This is exactly based on the appropriations product that Joe Biden put in place in the first place. They have voted on this in March of this year. They voted on it. Now this time they've decided that they will not vote to support a continuing resolution. We could do it in a matter of minutes. And opening up government would assure the continuation of the benefits that you just talked about, the WIC benefits, the SNAP benefits, put the FAA folks back in the control towers again with pay, and actually get our staff members some pay as well. There's no reason not to be working with a continuing resolution so we can finish out the rest of our appropriations bills. There's no question about the path forward. It is pass the continuing resolution, and then let's get right back in and get our appropriations done like we're supposed to be doing.
I heard the Vice President was asked about contingency funding. Could money be moved around to extend these SNAP benefits absent the end of this shutdown? And I wonder if that's something that you would support. He said it's something they're looking into. Do you support kind of trying to find a way to move funds around to keep those benefits in place for 40 million Americans?
We've actually had some discussions within the Senate. It's going to be very challenging to do that. There is some money out there. It's not enough to do a month's worth of SNAP benefits. So I wish I could say yes, but we don't think that there's enough money there to make that work. The best way to do this, once again, it's not painful. Get a continuing resolution in place so that we can help these folks. Our Democrat colleagues know it. Look, they made a bad choice when they decided to have a government shutdown, when we were actually negotiating in very good faith to do a lot of the things that a number of my Democrat colleagues wanted to do in the first place. The path forward and the shutdown. And I think the administration is right with us on that. Vice President Vance was very clear today. Let's get this thing moving forward. Let's stand with this thing. Let's get the continuing resolution in place and get right back to work again on the appropriations bills. We are so close to actually having them done in a bipartisan fashion.
We had an announcement today, pivoting to your role on the Armed Services Committee, by the Secretary of Defense that the U.S. has taken out a number of boats off the coast of South America, adding to the number that they've taken out already. I wonder if you believe those attacks are legally justified, if you feel like your questions about how those attacks are being conducted and who's being attacked have been answered, or are there questions that you want to have answered by members of the administration?
My questions have not yet been answered. We did have a classified discussion on the issue. There was an agreement that they would try to get us the information, the opinions, the legal counsel that they received on making those determinations. We have not received them as of a couple hours ago. And so, do I think that they have asked the questions? Yes, I do. Have we been able to see the information that they're operating under? No. We have an oversight responsibility. I want to see that information.
We've seen the movement of this huge aircraft carrier. It's making its way to the coast of South America. A lot of folks, including Admiral James Stavridis, the retired admiral, writing for us on Bloomberg Opinion today, worried about what this portends. You don't need that kind of military might, he suggests, to do the kind of attacks that we've seen. Something bigger is at play here. How much pause does that give you? How much of an understanding do you have of the broader military objectives the U.S., the administration, has here in South America?
The only thing that we have right now is what you also have, that public information. But remember, and what I go back to is what about intervention there, and what would it look like? We know that President Reagan invaded Grenada authorized the use of military force. We know that President Bush used it in Panama. And I suspect that the same type of reasoning might very well be going on in the discussions about the possible use of military forces when it comes to the issues at hand today. I don't know for sure. We've received no briefing suggesting it, but watching the public reports, I think the same arguments would be made under this type of an activity as what was made in the 1980s during both of those two interventions.
I'm going to read a tweet that we got from the Prime Minister of Israel today, Benjamin Netanyahu. He said, following security consultations, Prime Minister Netanyahu has directed the military to immediately carry out forceful strikes in the Gaza Strip. I know that you were among lawmakers who cheered the ceasefire that was put in place with the help of the United States. How worried are you in light of that statement from the Prime Minister that there are these subsequent attacks? How worried are you about the fragility of that ceasefire?
We knew that dealing with Hamas was going to be difficult. They're a terrorist organization. They made a deal in order to get an attempt to get a ceasefire. They did release the hostages. We want them to finish this thing out. But there are segments of that group that may very well be causing problems and attacking Israelis. A lot of those folks that were over there, the chances are they thought this was a chance to regroup. And so when the Prime Minister says that he authorized an attack, my suspicion, although I have no reason, I haven't seen any classified reports on it, my suspicion is that they found a group either readying attack or getting ready or reforming their military units. Part of the agreement we have with Hamas is that they will disband. They basically will drop down their arms. There's going to be some real challenges in getting that completed. They're a terrorist organization. There's going to be a lot of those folks that aren't going to want to participate in that. But we have to move forward with, first of all, the ceasefire. And if we really want long-term lasting peace in Gaza, Hamas has to literally go away when it comes to being an armed unit. There's no question about that.
Senator, last question. I'll return to the luncheon you had today. I don't know if steak salad was on the menu, but I know you care an awful lot about beef. Yours is a state that has, I believe, millions of heads of cattle. And we've heard the president suggesting maybe something that he and the United States could do to help Argentina would be to increase the amount of beef imported into this country. That's something I gather you stand firmly against. And I wonder if you feel like the administration has satisfactorily heard you out on that, if you think this is something that the president is not going to pursue.
Yeah, look, I disagree with bringing in beef from Argentina. There's no question about that. But it is a small amount of beef. I'm not going to go to war with the administration at this stage, but I am going to point out that if they think that this is an issue with our cattle producers causing the price of beef to rise the way that it's gone, two things happen. Number one, consumers are buying it. And if they're going to buy $6 hamburger and compare that with the price literally of what a bag of chips is, they're making a reasonable decision that protein is not that bad. Second of all, if you're going to be blaming American cattle producers for the price increases in grocery stores when you got a whole lot of middlemen, that's kind of like blaming a coffee producer in South America for the price of an $8 latte. It's not necessarily connected. Right now, we know that since the president spoke out on this, the price of live cattle has actually been going down. But at the same time, boxed beef, which is brought in from overseas by the same four packers that control 85% of the market, is going up in value. You're not going to see a decrease in the grocery store for beef as long as boxed beef is going up in value. And that's what's going on right now. Don't blame the American cattle producer. What you could do is actually help him be able to produce more livestock across the United States. Open up more federal lands for grazing so that they can keep that foundation herd. If they do that, then there's a consistency and the herds won't go up and down based upon how much drought we've got in the United States. The other thing which is really important, I think, to these producers, they truly believe, like I do, that our livestock, our cattle is the highest premium quality cattle any place. Let's make mandatory country of origin labeling part of our trade process. The president talks about being made in America and how that is. Let's do the same thing with our beef as well.
A full plate of topics there with the senator from South Dakota, Mike Rounds. Thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. Thanks for joining us here on Balance of Power. Coming up, Hurricane Melissa smashes into the Jamaican coast with catastrophe bond investors looking on. We'll bring you the details. And President Trump has formally appealed his conviction in New York State's hush money case. We'll discuss with our political panel next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Bloomberg Radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm David Gura, in for Joe Matthew. Here are the stories we're watching in today's Power Brief. Hurricane Melissa makes landfall in Jamaica as the strongest storm to hit the island in 174 years. Melissa is a Category 5 storm with sustained wind speeds of 175 miles per hour, and it's expected to move diagonally across the island nation. Total losses could range from $5 billion to $16 billion, according to Chuck Watson. He's a disaster modeler with Enki Research. Catastrophe bond investors are being told to brace for a payout. President Trump has formally appealed his criminal hush money convictions in New York. He is hoping to expunge his criminal record. The president's personal attorneys say the conviction should be overturned because the trial was, quote, fatally marred by faulty evidence overseen by a judge who should have recused himself. A Manhattan jury found Trump guilty of 34 felony counts some 17 months ago after a 6-week trial over what prosecutors said was a scheme to hide a $130,000 payment from his former lawyer to adult film star Stormy Daniels. Trump continues to deny that allegation. Meanwhile, as President Trump and his supporters float the notion of him having a third term, despite that being prohibited by the Constitution, discussing ways to circumvent the Constitution, Speaker Mike Johnson commented on the prospect, saying this earlier today.
I think the president knows, and he and I have talked about the constrictions of the Constitution, as much as so many of the American people lament that. The Trump 2028 cap is one of the most popular that's ever been produced. I don't see a way to amend the Constitution because it takes about 10 years to do that, as you all know, to allow all the states to ratify what 2/3 of the House and 3/4 of the states would approve. So I don't see the path for that.
Joining me now with their reaction to this story and more is this evening's political panel, Megan Hayes, former special assistant to President Biden and Democratic strategist, alongside Republican strategist David Avella, chairman of GOPAC. David, let me start with you. I could almost see in Speaker Mike Johnson there maybe some frustration with having to field these questions over and over again, yet mea culpa, here we are talking about it once more. How do you see this resolving itself? I mean, he's giving the constitutional lesson there, but again, it's coming up. We hear the president joking about it. We hear Steve Bannon bringing it up as well.
Well, and yet the president gets to have a good chuckle because it sends Democrats crazy every time he says something like that. I think the president knows that. And also, let's remember, he's still got 3 more years. There's a lot to accomplish in 3 years. By the end of his 3 years, he may be done all the things he wants to accomplish. We still have a long road to go. Though I will say, when you think about 28, the really interesting thing is that clearly that Vice President Harris is in Gavin Newsom's head, because a day after she says she wants to run for president, he says he wants to run for president.
Megan, I'll have you respond to that. Yes, we did have the two of them talking about their prospects over the course of the weekend here. But I wonder, we can laugh about it, we can roll our eyes at how often it comes up. Does it have any kind of tangible effect on our politics and the political conversation, him bringing up the prospect of this third term?
Yeah, I think it drives Democrats actually literally
it's successful
insane.
In that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that Democrats have spent a long time saying, oh, he won't do that, don't worry. And I think a lot of people now are saying he is going to figure out a way to do it. So I think people are a little bit more skeptical, and I think it does drive the base a little crazy. And to your point about Gavin Newsom and Kamala Harris, in 2020 we had over 20 candidates, so the more people in the primary, the better person we are going to get from the Democratic Party.
I want to get a sense from each of you of where we are in this shutdown. We're coming up on November 1st, which is this big pressure point having to do with benefits, of course, open enrollment starting then as well. Your sense of relative optimism or pessimism about how long this stretches on?
I think Democrats are coming up against a real problem here. I think that the American people are going to look to them to make a deal and open the government. And it might not include getting the subsidies passed and it just on a handshake that they will promise to negotiate. But I do think people cannot go without their SNAP benefits and their WIC benefits. People cannot go hungry. And I think that the Democrats are going to face a real problem here when those benefits don't go out.
David, I've noticed a lot of talk from the Secretary of Transportation about how air travel is going to be disrupted in the near term. When you think about pressure points, where do you see the most likely catalyst to an off-ramp here?
The catalyst is the economic impact this is going to have, and also where it ultimately puts Democrats. You think about if the labor unions came out 10 years ago and said, open up the government, Democratic leaders would have said, let's go do that, right? And now they're saying, nah, we're not ready to do that yet. And so it's an interesting dynamic that ultimately impacts when this resolution will occur. But where's the real pressure point? It's as government workers aren't getting their checks, and then they're not going out to restaurants, and they're not able to pay for gas to show up for work that they don't even get paid to do right now. And then that has the triple effect down the economy.
Is the Speaker making a mistake not having members come back? Do you think that strategy is working out for him?
Well, they've passed the continuing resolution. It's in the Senate. The Senate needs to pass the resolution. But as we were just talking, it only goes till November 21st. So what you're counting on is the federal government to pass a resolution to stay open until the 21st. And in those days, until November 21st, they get all the funding bills passed.
Megan, what do you think? Should he have them back? I was at the Capitol. Yes. It's incredibly quiet, and there's all this talk about how there's an absence of comedy on Capitol Hill. You can't really have it if you don't have people there talking to one another.
Well, one, they're getting paid, so they should be back in Washington doing their jobs. People elect our government to work. They elect these members to come to Washington, show up, and govern. They are not doing that. They also are not working with their colleagues to negotiate. They are not doing any sort of good faith negotiation. I think it is in complete bad form that they are not in Washington to figure out how to do it. And you'll notice some members who are worried about losing their seats in some of these redistricting fights, like Kevin Kiley in California, he's been in Washington, and he wants to talk to members, and he wants to get something done. So it's interesting that people who know that they have a little bit more to lose in these purple districts are showing up to work.
On the other side of that, Tom Tillis, senator from my home state with a foot out the door, doesn't have much to lose because he's wrapping up his tenure here in the Senate, suggesting that maybe Republicans are making a mistake here, that this health care issue is one that's going to be salient as we approach the midterms. Do you think he has a point there and it's not being talked about honestly by Republicans?
Well, it goes to the President Trump's bigger point is let's have a larger discussion. Let's get this CR passed, and let's have a larger discussion about where we need to go with health care, whether that be the subsidies, whether that be insurance. Look, a lot of people have decided instead of signing up for Obamacare, they're just going to pay the tax penalty. That we could be looking at things like health savings accounts. We could be looking at making insurance plans that people actually want to pay for versus taking the penalty through Obamacare. We could do a lot of things. First, we have to pass the CR.
Megan, very quickly, here, we've got about a minute left. We had one of the largest unions of federal workers coming out saying, pass the clean CR, let's get on with it. Doesn't seem to have resonated. Does that surprise you that didn't make more of a difference?
No, because I think that that's a small group of people compared to the 40 million people that they're trying to save from, SNAP and WIC and some of the insurance benefits. But to David's point about the insurance not being impacting other people, Trump's own pollster, Tony Fabrizio, put out a poll saying that this was going to impact Republicans, and 90% of Americans, including Republicans, want the subsidies passed or want affordable health care. So they need to have a conversation. What that conversation looks like is to be seen, but there needs to be a conversation about making health care more affordable. It's impactful on the economy.
I'll ask you very quickly. Do you think the union statement would make more of a difference?
I thought it would. I mentioned that earlier. The fact that the unions that had such large sway within the Democratic Party, the blue-collar workers that are all across this country just got told, nah, we're not interested by the Democratic leaders.
My thanks to both of you here.
Thank you.
On this Tuesday. Nice to meet both of you. Megan Hayes and David Vella joining me here on set in Washington, D.C. And make sure to watch The Fed Decides tomorrow at 1:30 p.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg Television and Bloomberg Radio. Of live coverage of the Federal Reserve's rate decision and Fed Chair Jerome Powell's news conference. Of course, our coverage continues through the night into the morning here on the East Coast of President Trump's trip to Asia. He's making his way in the coming hours from Tokyo to South Korea. Of course, that big meeting coming up between him and President Xi Jinping. Will have coverage of that here on Bloomberg Television and Radio, on Bloomberg.com and the terminal as well. My thanks to you for joining us on Balance of Power. David Gura, Joe Matthew will be back tomorrow night. This is Bloomberg.